Welcome.
Dobro
Today we go down into the
Сегодня
depths
we
of the sea and
отправимся
of
в
history
глубину
to
мора
understand
и
how a nascent
истории,
world
чтобы
conflict
понять,
altered ideas
как
about naval
впервые
power,
рождающийся
and why what German
мировой
officers
конфликт
believed at the
менял
start of the
взгляды
Second World
на
War
могущество
turned out to be
флота
far from the
и
whole truth.
почему то,
Shattering
во что
traditional
верили
assumptions,
немецкие
American
офицеры в
aircraft
начале
carriers
Второй
evolved
мировой
from
войны,
negligible niche
оказалось
contraptions
далеко
into
не
moving
всей
cities on
правдой.
water, while
Взорвав
German strategic
традиционные
thought froze in the
представления,
past. How and
американские
why did their
авианосцы
original convictions
превратились
about the
из
weakness of these
ничтожных
floating
нишевых
cities
устройств
suddenly
в
turn into
движущиеся
fear
города на
and
воде,
astonishment?
а
What did the
немецкое
blend of old
стратегическое русло
concepts
застыло
and
в
new
прошлом.
reality open
Как
a
и
rift from
почему
which there was no
их
way back?
исходные
And how quickly
убеждения о
did Germany
слабости
grasp
этих
that mobile,
плавающих городов
autonomous carriers of the
внезапно
future,
обернулись
rewriting
страхом
every
и
rule of the game?
удивлением?
In this
Почему
investigation,
смешение
we will
старых
examine how
концепций
shifts
и
in
новой
perception and
реальности
technology
создало
upended all
разлом,
naval strategy,
из которого
and who stood
уже
behind
не
this
было
upheaval.
выхода. И
Ready to see
насколько
the
быстро
hidden
Германия
mechanisms of new
осознала,
maritime
что
victories
мобильные
and understand
автономные
exactly
авианосцы
how the U.S.
— это
Navy won on
будущее,
the world waters?
меняющие
Then let's
все
begin.
правила игры.
At the beginning of the
В
Second
этом
World
расследовании
War, the
мы
mood of the German
разберем,
naval command
как
was
изменения в
tinged with habitual
восприятии и
pragmatism
технологиях
and
перевернули
suspicion
всю
toward
морскую
innovations
стратегию.
lingering on the
И
edge
кто
of military
стоит за
science
этим
and technology.
переворотом?
Carriers were
Готовы
enigmatic
увидеть скрытые
giants,
механизмы
almost
новых
fantastical
морских
constructions that
побед и
surfaced on the
понять,
horizon of
как
rumors and
именно
intelligence reports.
американский флот
Yet most
одержал
officers
победу
regarded them
на
more as
водных
specialized,
просторах. Тогда
marginal
начнем.
means than as
В
fundamental
начале
pillars
Второй
of modern
мировой
sea power.
войны
Their
настроение
vision of
немецкого
future naval
морского
battles rested
командования
on a
было
classical
окрашено
concept.
привычным
Powerful battleships,
прагматизмом,
well-protected
недоверием
destroyers, and
новинкам,
submarines capable of presenting a
остающимся на
threat
грани
at long
военной
range.
науки и
In their eyes, the
технологий.
carrier was nothing
Авианосцы
more than a
—
very
это
vulnerable
были
and
загадочные
temperamental
гиганты,
exotic ship
почти
whose existence
фантастические
largely
конструкции,
depended on the superiority
которые
of other
появлялись на
fleet elements.
горизонте
It was
слухов
fragile,
и
if you like,
разведывательных
and
донесений.
inextricably linked to
Однако
the role of the
большинство
British fleet,
офицеров
especially
воспринимали
its
их
powerful
скорее как
aviation and control of the
огромные,
air, to
нишевые
that very
средства,
goggle,
а
which could
не
pounce on a ship
конвенционную
out of
столпу
nowhere and
современной
smash it with a
морской
single
мощи.
blow.
Их
The first reports coming from
представление
the
о
Atlantic
будущем
looked like
морских боев
mysterious,
базировалось на
exaggerated
классической
silhouettes
концепции
flickering on the horizon.
мощных
German
линкоров,
scouts often
хорошо
observed large
защищенных
dark shapes
эсминцах,
against storm or
морских
skyline,
подводных
spawning
лодках,
distrust and
способных
skepticism. Part of
презентовать
the command
угрозу
staff
на
considered
больших
these reports
дистанциях.
residues of fantasy,
Воспринимаемыми
myths born of
авианосцев был не
fatigue or
более
poor
чем очень
interpretation. They were
уязвимым
perceived
и
in
капризным
fragments, without proper
экзотическим
confidence,
кораблем.
as
Ее существование
unfounded
во многом
imaginings.
зависело
Not everything
от
could be explained
превосходства
by
других
intelligence or
элементов
cipher
флота.
intercepts.
Он
There were
был
vast
фрагил
distances
хрупким,
separating them
если
from real events,
угодно,
a
и
shortage of
исключительно
precise data,
тесно связанным
deception
с
and
ролью
optical
британского
illusion.
флота,
Intelligence,
особенно с
intercepted
его
traffic,
мощной
and
авиацией
analysis were
и
built on
превосходством в
limited
воздухе.
facts. The
С
proofs
той
were
самой Google,
unconvincing.
которая
Photographs
могла
taken from German
накинуться на
aircraft
корабль
often
из
failed to convey
ниоткуда,
true scale,
разрушая
and
его
radio intercept
одним
capabilities
натиском.
were imperfect.
Первые
Even carefully
сообщения,
collected signals could
поступавшие
not
из
fully reveal the
Атлантики,
power and
выглядели как
technological complexity
загадочные,
of U.S.
преувеличенными
carriers, their
силуэты,
driving force,
мелькавшие на
aviation,
горизонте.
which could quite literally
Немецкие
materialize
разведчики
from
часто
nowhere and
наблюдали
destroy even
большие
the mightiest
сонные
ships.
формы на фоне
Germans
шторма
perceived
или
carriers
горизонта,
as
что порождало
mythical
недоверие
monsters
и
capable of
скепсис.
overturning the
Какая-то
familiar
часть
order of naval
командного
combat.
состава
Yet they still
считала
did not
эти
grasp the
сообщения
full measure of their
пережитками
destructive
фантазий,
strength.
мифами,
Reappraisal began
порожденными
only with the
усталостью
arrival of
или
real
неудачной
combat scenes
интерпретацией.
witnessed in the
Они
heavy Pacific
воспринимались
confrontations.
разрозненно,
Clashes
без
between
должного
Japanese and
доверия,
American fleets,
как
where gigantic
необоснованными
carriers
фантазии.
displayed their most
Не все
fearsome
можно было
qualities. For the
объяснить
first time, German
разведными или
officers saw
перехватами
American and
шифров
Japanese carriers,
огромных
like mythic
расстояний,
ships, go
которые
into battle,
отделяли их
merging
от
aircraft
реальных
and
событий,
warships into a single
недостатка
lethal
точных данных,
ensemble. They
маскировки
watched them in
иллюзий,
island battles,
разведка,
in convoy
перехваченные
operations across the
сообщения и
Atlantic, when
аналитика
air transports were
базировались
accompanied
на
by the thunder of
ограниченных фактах.
explosions and the fleeting
Доказательства же
traces of
были
rocket salvos.
неубедительны.
These episodes
Фотографии,
ruptured dense
снимаемые
layers
с
of
немецких
disbelief
самолетов,
and made clear
зачастую не
a theory that
передавали
it seemed
истинного
fantastical
масштаба,
was now
а
reality.
технические
Gradually,
возможности
over
перехвата
numerous
были
encounters and
несовершенны.
clashes, the
Даже
German command
тщательно
began to
собираемые
rewrite its
сигналы не
assumptions.
смогли
Evidence
полностью
from
раскрыть
technical
мощь и
experiments and
технологическую
observations of the
сложность
fighting power of
американских
American and
авианосцев
Japanese
и
fleets.
движущей
All this
силы,
led to the conclusion
авиации,
that old
которая
concepts
могла
had grown
буквально
obsolete.
возникать
Carriers
из
ceased to
ниоткуда
be
и
exotic vessels
разрушать
for the
даже
skeptical mind.
самые
Striking
мощные
them from
корабли.
afar was no
Немцы
longer a question of
воспринимали
doubt. It
авианосцы
became clear
как
that a new piece had
мифические
appeared on the board of
чудовища,
strategy,
способные
one that had to be
разрушить
reckoned with.
привычный
For the
порядок
Germans,
морской
an
борьбы.
internal
Но
question
еще не
remained, their
осознавали
own
всей
strategic
их равной
outlook. Why did they
разрушительной
keep
силы.
focusing on traditional models of
Переосмысление
sea power,
началось только
battleships
с
and
появлением im realny
over new
by
realities.
John.
Why, despite an intellectual recognition of their seaborne innovation, did their strategy seem chained to old dogmas, to the need to defend and dominate the maritime expanse with powerful, protected Britannia, or with submarines? Where was the hidden source of this contradiction between the new face of naval battle and the conservatism and the leadership's minds? Deep inside, the question ripened and would not let them rest. How to halt a paradigm shift when more and more evidence testified that the old was not displacing the new, but merely trying to keep it afloat like a ghost of the past. The central conflict of this phase lay in the fissure between a traditional understanding of maritime supremacy and a new reality that no longer hid beyond a distant horizon, but pressed upon them. Initial skepticism, shaded by wonder, gave way to mounting anxiety. Why did this new type of ship seem such a hard-to-fight and latent threat, despite their own intelligence and observations? How did outdated doctrines still dictate decisions when their own eyes and evidence pointed the other way? And above all, what was the key to understanding the truth? Was it possible to accept that old weapons could yield to new? And that after years of strategic preparation, paradigms accustomed to battleships and coastal defenses would be unable to withstand air power erupting on the horizon. This became their inner trial, a test of reason, logic, and more importantly, of their own historical memory. The transformation, it turned out, did not happen in an instant. It proceeded slowly, bit by bit, like ancient ice cracking under the weight of fresh proof and testimony. German officers realized that to oppose the new reality meant not merely to rework plans, but to rethink completely the role of their fleet in a world that was beginning to resemble an era of aerial chieftains and maritime illusions. How quickly and how radically could Germany alter its strategy after the shock? By what means did a change in perception harden into a new doctrine? These questions did not leave them to solitary reflection. They became part of committees in the hush of command rooms, the cashiering of old shipboard strategies that concealed within themselves a spark of change. The titanic struggle of old views with the new. And this was only the beginning of greater shifts that would shape history. For as the evidence shows, the realization of U.S. carrier power became a turning point, an archetypal fracture, a boundary between eras that conditionally closed one and fully opened another. This entire picture, far from a mere chronicle of moving from old doctrine to new,
Centralny konflikt этого этапа разлома между традиционным пониманием морского превосходства и новой реальностью, которая уже не скрывалась за дальним горизонтом, а буквально наступала на них. Первоначальный скептицизм, оцененный удивлением, сменился на растущую тревогу. Почему этот новый тип кораблей так трудно кажется мобилью и скрытой угрозой, несмотря на их разведение и наблюдение? Каким образом устаревшие доктрины все еще диктовали решения, когда их собственные глаза и доказательства указывали на обратное? А главное, что было ключом к пониманию этого разлома? Возможно ли было поверить, что старое оружие может уступить место новому, и что спустя годы стратегической подготовки, парадигма, привыкшие к линкорам и береговым оборонам, не смогут противостоять воздушной мощи, которая ворвалась на горизонте. Этот вопрос стал их внутренним вызовом разума, логики, что важнее, их собственной исторической памяти. Оказывается, трансформация произошла не мгновенно. Она шла медленно, по чуть-чуть. Словно древний лед, медленно трескавшийся под весом новых доказательств и свидетельств. Немецкие офицеры поняли, противопоставить новую реальность значит не просто перестроить свои планы, а полностью переосмыслить роль своего флота в мире, который отчетливо начинал напоминать эпоху воздушных вождей и морских элит. Насколько быстро и насколько радикально Германия способна изменить свою стратегию после этого потрясения? Каким образом смена восприятия превратилась в новые доктрины? Эти вопросы не оставляли их уединенными размышлениями.
could compare with
Not
in length, not in internal volume, and certainly not in functionality. Inside, American carriers were an entire universe. They were struck by the provisioning systems and living quarters engineered to ensure autonomy, the ability to live, work, rest, and even entertain without leaving the ship. There were movie theaters, films, recreational programs, gyms, swimming pools, and messes, everything a modern person might need. The internal layout, organized with astonishing precision and automation, left Germans genuinely shocked. Automatic mechanisms, lifts controlled by computer systems, transport lines that move crew and cargo at lightning speed. All of it heralded a new era in the naval industry. Such a combination of technological sophistication, autonomy, and scale-embodied ideas the Germans had not even suspected. America was building ships, cities afloat, that could conduct extended independent operations far from shore, without support or with minimal support, because they had their own repair shops, fuel stocks, and advanced supply systems. The question was brutally simple. How had a country with a smaller aluminum and steel base, without so strong a battleship tradition, managed to create such a vessel? Why could Germany, with its powerful battleships and ingenious submarines, not replicate this success? Where lay the essence of that technological and conceptual lead? These reflections ripened in German minds. It was not only the physical dimensions of the ships that tested them, but the very idea of internal autonomy, this lonely city sailing the seas. They began asking questions that had previously seemed irrelevant. What is the future of naval combat? Who truly owns information and technology? Why can't our own ships, battleships and submarines, reach such a level of development or even surpass it? Why the Western fleet long since departed from old notions of sea power and created something more than mere warships, new territories, new forms of command, new concepts of fleets independence? This inner conflict, the question of prospects, of the value of strategy that underrates the significance of technological progress, became the foundation for reassessing concepts of naval warfare. One thing was obvious. Those who built such ships were not just choosing between power and autonomy. They were forging an entirely different way to wage war. And the German side understood. Did they have any chance to build something comparable? Or had their traditional strengths, battleships and submarines, already grown obsolete beside high-tech, autonomous carriers? For the key lies not only in physical size or structural complexity. At the root is an idea, this city model, at sea personified a new concept of maritime strength, technology, autonomy, infrastructure, and mobility were equal lines of strategy. These ships were, for Germany, kind of brilliantly lit beacon, a demonstrative example that focused solely on traditional weapons was insufficient to defeat a modern foe. The task before the Germans was clear: understand and assess the scale and capabilities. A crucial part of that was their undervaluation of the Western concept. And though they acknowledged the strength of the traditional fleet, they did not take seriously the automated systems, the level of internal autonomy, and the strategic advantages the Americans possessed. What they saw became a true blow. The logical conclusion that the classical European naval strategy, based on powerful battleships and submarines, could not compete with more technologically advanced models. At the same time, recognizing the scale and autonomy of American carriers was the key to understanding that the naval battle of the future had already begun. It was not merely a stage of technological development. It was a conceptual revolution. And for the Germans, and for all who watched, it became clear the next generation of naval warfare was not only about images of rockets, salvos, and naval guns. It was a war of cities on water, governed by systems, deployed around the globe, independent and tireless. The meaning lay here. In the future, dominance would rest not only on firepower, but on the ability to wage autonomous, self-sufficient war. And it was precisely this lesson, vividly demonstrated by American carriers, that would become the chief challenge for all Europe, and, in the end, for the global concept of naval strategy. In the heart of the world ocean, a new erosion of traditional military notions arose, forever changing the rules of the maritime game. In the early 20th century, before radar had carved through the fog of ignorance, mechanics and technology unfolded with hurricane speed, The U.S. Navy launched a revolution that shook the foundations of old strategies and forced sea powers to reconsider their priorities. This was not merely a ship with a high flight deck and armor capable of firing heavy guns at long range. No, the American carrier became a mobile airfield moving through the marine abyss, like a huge metallic city, able to sustain hundreds of people and operate at the edge of its capabilities. Inside its hull lay magazines of munitions and stores, repair shops, sick bays, and living spaces. Everything that made the ship virtually autonomous. It was not just a daring design, but a unique complex able to serve as an independent sea base, functioning without recourse to nearby ports or shore installations. Look at the design of these ships, and you see they lack the heavy artillery that once defined the fleet strength. Their weapons are fighters, bombers, torpedo planes, the main, virtually sole instrument of destruction. They rose from specially prepared decks, flying to targets hundreds of miles away with precision that inspired hushed awe in observers. The entire process of air operations was highly automated. Aircraft launched, recovered, and executed their missions with stunning speed and synchronicity, as if all the mechanisms of this moving city worked under the control of a single brain. It was exactly this level of automation, an innovation German strategists could not fully comprehend or predict, that proved decisive. Form-ups, dispersals, combat sorties, everything unfolded with astonishing speed. Each aircraft was not just a machine, but a moving force of strategic potential, of global aims and political pressure. The U.S. carrier could launch and recover hundreds of planes, turning itself into an entire carrier cluster, not one, but several airfields, afloat and always ready for battle. It may seem mere technical complexity, yet behind it stood a wholly different level of strategic thinking. A carrier is not simply a fighting platform. It is a weapon of the future, able to operate anywhere on the globe, regardless of external conditions, without needing land bases or ports. Such mobility, this autonomy. Back then, it sounded like a direct challenge to old naval dogmas and to a tactics built on massive gunnery duels at sea. So what lay at the core of this technological and tactical revolution? What is the fundamental difference between the old notion of naval battle and the new concept? The answer lies in the gulf between the static and the dynamic, between mass and mobility. Old fleets, like the battles of Ganga, fought for dominance through drawn-out artillery duels. Their weapons, heavy guns aboard, were meant to entrench a static position, to destroy the enemy at range, to wage sea battles in which each ship strove to hold its ground and inflict defeat without leaving its bastions. But that was a conflict of an old era, when command of a narrow strait, a port, or an island decided everything. By contrast, the American revolutionary approach shattered these dogmas. Their carriers created an entirely new image: mobile, fast, autonomous platforms able to deliver destruction anywhere in the world. They uprooted the need for static positions and massive artillery, replacing them with jet aircraft, guided missiles, torpedoes. This was not only technological development, it was the birth of a new geopolitical paradigm, a new type of war in which speed, automation, and air power became paramount. This revolution, however, provoked resistance and questions. Why could a fleet built for traditional naval battles not adapt on the spot to these new realities? Why could Germany, with its celebrated naval workshops and shipwrights of mighty battleships and armor vessels, only partially understand, let alone reproduce, such concepts? The situation was this: German naval thought remained confined within old dogmas. Smooth armor, heavy artillery, powerful protection, all for static clashes. And frankly, it was hard for German strategists to grasp at once that these new ships were not just big ships, but entire complexes, airfields at sea. They lacked in their arsenal that level of technology, of automation, of aircraft that the Americans were building. At first, the very idea of a mobile, self-sufficient aviation ship seemed incredible to them, illogical and impractical. German flotillas, renowned in the era of Ganga-style battles, were built upon mighty battleships capable of conducting long, blind gunnery duels. They believed in heavy guns and dismissed the concept of air attack as a breakthrough tool. Meanwhile, the Americans moved only forward, demonstrating that the future belonged to speed, mobility, and aviation that could not just support a fight, but initiate. Naturally, this raised another question. Could Germany create analogous moving cities at sea? Could its engineers and strategists reorient to the new reality? Was there any way to take their old masters of shipbuilding and convert them into modern platforms able to compete with the new American standard? These questions nagged because it was obvious that the next steps in naval war would be determined precisely by these new concepts. What did this technological revolution mean to the future? It did not merely change tactics or technology. It predetermined the course of world wars. The age of dominant heavy ships and gunnery duels was receding. Combat shifted ever more into the air and onto the sea, with a principle of speed and precision rule, and the very idea of a compact fleet moving at the speed of a horn blast seemed revolutionary. Armies and flotillas became self-contained weapon systems with their own strategies, tactical methods, and technological advantages. There was no longer time for long deployments, for sieges and attrition by overwhelming firepower. The point was swift defeat. One strike, one sortie, one battle. This revolution set new standards in the struggle for control of seas and became the pivot that ultimately shaped the outcome of large-scale wars. Carriers were not mere transports. They were machines capable of determining the course of history, fusing technology, tactics, and strategy into a single whole. The great powers understood this too late, and those who dismissed it yielded positions that could never be regained. These new, mobile air-sea platforms, harbingers of future generations of military technology, changed everything we knew about naval war and pointed to the inevitable. Forward, into the ocean of the future, where speed and automation are the keys to power. In the very beginning of 42, when the dust had not yet settled after the first clashes in the Mediterranean, the world heard a new sound, the quick, confident approach of aero engines gaining altitude over the sea's mirror. That sound did not belong to ordinary battle squadrons. It rose on the horizon as a symbol of change, the appearance of American carriers in a zone where battleships and heavy cruisers had previously dominated. The time when naval battles were decided exclusively in messianic clashes of mighty guns and armor was slowly passing. Taking the stage instead were light, mobile, nearly invisible platforms, floating air bases capable of delivering blows with unprecedented precision and a potential that could flip the strategic picture upside down. The first years of war in the Mediterranean were saturated with fights for control of vital lines of communication, for strategic nodes and port cities. In that struggle, both sides, some holding, others advancing, felt the growing power of aviation tactics. With carriers' arrival, changes comparable to a revolution began in this theater. Carriers broadened the operational possibilities of Allied forces and raised naval combat to a new level. The Royal Navy was hardly a novice in sea fighting, but it was the American carriers, entering several key Mediterranean points, that displayed unique flexibility, mobility, and strategic value. No one had seen aviation adapt so quickly and precisely to changing conditions, to screen convoys, shield amphibious operations, or strike shore infrastructure, all of which had seemed out of reach in the past. This new tactic showed itself vividly in the North African campaign during the operation codenamed Torch. In that struggle, where fateful decisions were made under uncertainty, carriers proved not mere auxiliaries, but principal players. Their presence made it possible to cover maritime convoys, carrying unprecedented volumes of material, weapons, and provisions. Atypical naval confrontations with inevitable choke points and obstacles. All this became the responsibility of airborne platforms. Using carriers in these operations meant that past shorebound, static methods of defense ceased to be effective. They could not compete with the mobility and speed, with the capacity for instantaneous response, inherent to aircraft operating from a relatively compact but powerful ship. Aviation provided control over the sea surface, over the flow of events, over the fate of the entire operation. Later, in 1943, the assault on Sicily became a vivid example of how naval power, reinforced by carriers, turns into a decisive factor. The landings of American, British, and Canadian forces succeeded despite anxious moments and hardships. matters at this mark is to see that this success owed not only to the number of assault battalions, to air cover under seasoned pilots and commanders, but also to the presence of carriers, the new, mobile weapons that could, by their mere appearance, change the course of battle. Their great ships and deck-based aircraft smashed defensive positions, creating the sense that at sea this was no longer just a contest for control, but a full-blown transformation of the entire tactic. With such confidence in their superiority, why were the Germans expected to shield their shores in traditional naval strategies, forced to admit they were lagging? The answer lies in indisputable evidence: aerodynamic power, platform mobility, quick reaction capability, and the ability to animate air operations without national bases or major shore infrastructure. This all rendered classical coastal defense systems obsolete. Before the power of airborne platforms aboard carriers, defensive plans went stale, and military engineers and strategists began asking, what next? What means can check or destroy these mobile sea bases? The answers lie in analyzing why Germany failed to counter this revolution effectively. The explanations are simple. German naval tactics, still grounded in classical strategies, were unprepared for carriers' mobility and elusiveness. Their coastal defense, a mesh of fortifications, minefields, escort vessels, could not adapt to the new reality, lacking insights, technologies, and tactical reserves to force a fight on the airplanes. The Germans came to a bitter realization: their strength was insufficient. Soon it became obvious that maritime power and control over sea communications were passing to those who could command airborne platforms, to the Allies and their carriers. Empirical testimony, proofs upon proofs, was irrefutable. The superiority demonstrated by American and British carriers was not a mere brush upon the sea. It turned it into an arena where the struggle for control was waged on a new level. They did not merely churn the spray or make noise in the skies. They changed the rules of the game. What was, what is, and what will be, all attested through a shift in the balance of forces in naval strategy. A balance that finally receded into the past, ceding place to a new age, the age of aerial mobility. How critical was this change? The answer is that such first-of-their-kind operations not only altered the current picture of the military world, but also foreshadowed the large battles ahead, in the Atlantic, in Europe, and on other stages. Campaigns in which control of sea communications became nearly decisive. In this context, one must ask, what will the future tell us? What lessons were learned in practice? What facts and consequences sealed the dominance of airborne platforms? And at what price were these revolutionary shifts secured? The answers lie in plain view. They are evidence that in the history of wars, even the harshest and bloodiest, victory often goes not to those who fire the loudest, but to those who are smarter, more mobile, and able to foresee the coming era. Thus, the story of American carriers in the Mediterranean is not only a chronicle of tactical steps or strategic decisions. It is the harbinger of sweeping changes prepared for the future of naval war. It is the greatest lesson proving that in a world of weapons and power, where control of the sea becomes control of nations' destinies, it is the air that embodies the new strength, the new authority, the new era that is only beginning. On that June day, when the Battle of Midway entered its decisive phase, it seemed the history of the Pacific theater changed forever. The roar of explosions and the uppercuts to exhausted Japanese carriers, engulfed in flame and smoke, became the symbol of a new era of naval war. At that moment, it was obvious. The day's fate was decided not by armies ashore, not by land bases or sea fortresses. Everything was decided by air power, by strategic reconnaissance, and by precise strikes. 4 Japanese carriers, once the unshakable pillars of the Imperial Navy, were destroyed in a matter of hours, the result of carrier tactics that forever altered the principles of naval combat. Ironically, it was there, on the spacious Pacific, that the strategy was born which would later prove invincible. Strategy in which aviation displaced all other means. On those waters, in that battle, American air tactics showed their strength and flexibility as never before. Their approach differed fundamentally from what European sea powers were used to. Americans focused on constant, precise attacks from long range. They often employed reconnaissance aircraft equipped with radiogoniometers and relay gear, allowing them to detect Japanese ships long before they themselves could be seen. This was not mere cold calculation. It was a precision blow grounded in exact data obtained through meticulous intelligence. U.S. carriers did not limit themselves to defending their routes. They created an atmosphere of constant threat that came from nowhere, a shadowy presence that kept the Japanese perpetually on edge. Emotion, anxiety, and tension intertwined with the accuracy of calculations as Americans launched their attacks. Their aircraft appeared as if from nowhere, struck and vanished, leaving Japanese command in complete bewilderment. It felt as if the opponent was not merely protected, but intent on not being seen, intent on making his attacks sudden and devastating. These tactical methods stood out sharply against the German naval doctrine, more patriotic and less flexible, where ships often became sitting targets. America's successes in the Pacific were not limited to the destruction of Japanese carriers and their fleet. Thereafter, virtually the entire island-hopping campaign, from Guam to Peleliu, rested on carrier. Enthusiastic assessments and plans held that the presence of powerful carriers effectively replaced the need for land bases. All logistics, all fighting capability relied on these floating airfields that could be directed wherever Japanese or German forces might be. They became mobile, swift, acting with precision and speed, like spacecraft of the future, rendering the old naval front static and stoutly fortified, obsolete. Such a future was obvious, and it did not come without what one might call revolutionary flexibility. Rapid repair and restoration of ancient titans, their replacement by new or strengthened counterparts, his thunderstruck theorists and strategists. After Midway, it became clear that large ships no longer stood on a pedestal as an untouchable value. The crucial factor now was the potential for rapid repair, mass production, and rapid deployment of new carriers. This fact shattered German beliefs about the rarity and supreme worth of their battleships and heavy cruisers. For now, well-armed carriers could operate relentlessly, unafraid of losses or delays. One key question when analyzing this era is, why exactly did the United States achieve such leadership in carrier construction strategy? Why were their aircraft, their ships, and their tactics so superior? The answer lies in the unique combination of political will and technological achievement. Americans bet on mass production, on scale that gave them the edge in every clash. Their engineers, strategists, and intelligence specialists fused new materials, new technologies, and new tactics into a single space, creating a front dominated not only by force, but by skillful use of information. At times it seems this entire strategy was prepared not at the front, but in rooms of analysts, diplomats, and engineers, like sunny windows and on warring factory lines. But what if the success was the fruit not only of technology, but also of ideology? Perhaps the confrontation between two great fronts, America and Germany, was not merely a struggle for resources and territory, but also a fight for maritime domain, where each country sought to lock down key routes and logistical arteries. The U.S. fleet, anchored on carriers, found itself in a position of advantage in global strategy. It could penetrate to the very heart of the maritime world, the Atlantic, where fears of possible German counterblows from sea always hovered like a shadow. If you think about what it would have meant for Germany had American carriers, akin to those that plied the Pacific, appeared in the Atlantic, the possibility of breakthroughs and penetration into strategic zones, from Gibraltar to Galicia, might have significantly altered the war's course, cutting the German fleet off from vital trade routes and key ports. Understanding this clarifies, American victory in the Pacific was not merely a local achievement. It foreshadowed a broader reshaping of the entire architecture of world sea power. This question opens a vast panorama of the future. Did American carriers become not just an instrument of victory and war? Were they the forerunners of a new concept?
Global maritime supremacy that would define the balance of power in a new epic. Perhaps their mobility, capacity for instant mobilization, strategic flexibility. All this would become the foundation not only for victory in a military conflict, but for cementing the country as the principal maritime charter of the future. And the main question before us now is, was the influence of that Pacific victory really so great on global history? Could that victory be the herald of a new world reputation for the United States, fixed not only on land and in the air, but also on the seas, where nations' fates are decided upon open swells and rolling waves? The answer seems hidden in a multitude of small events and strategic choices that lead to one central truth. The rift in history that opened on that June day showed the world that the future of naval war lies with carriers. And victory in the Pacific became not only a lesson for opponents, but the first stone in the foundation of a new era in which supremacy will be defined not by the might of great ships, but by intellect, technological progress, and strategic foresight. After the devastation of the Second World War, when the light of global recognition dimmed the shadow of ruins and loss, the German fleet faced not only defeat, but the inescapable reckoning with its role, its mistakes, its limits. In those years, as published reports and memoirs began to filter through the lens of time, one thing became evident. Much that had once seemed unshakable truth proved to be obsolete dogma. An enlightenment arrived through a hard realization. Their concepts, their strategy, their armament all proved insufficient, outdated, and ultimately losing in the face of a new, rapidly changing form of naval combat. Immersing oneself in these recollections, like a melancholy yet vital drama, one can trace how many German admirals finally admitted that their initial ideas, their old concepts of sea power, battleships with heavy armor and massive guns, and a predilection for submarines, were utterly unprepared for challenges of a new era. In their reports and memories, one hears an indisputable fact. They felt that all their prior notions of sea power were, in essence, symbols of bygone centuries, bristling with outdated tactics that could not withstand flexible, mobile, well-organized carrier tactics in the United States. And this realization did not arrive in a single day. It grew, took shape, and became clearer with each new engagement, each defeat, each account of the scale and organization of American carrier task groups. These ships shook not only fleet formations, but expectations and dreams of grandeur. They were hard to comprehend, impossible to grasp within old strategic frames. Their testimony carried a word that could neither be explained away nor ignored. It was the unfathomable, astonishing, lurking beyond the horizon of understanding. It was a revelation that finally undermined faith in the supremacy of capital ships and ossified fighting traditions. The past seemed to vanish beyond the horizon, yielding to a new concept of multi-purpose, mobile systems that could not only fight but avoid combat, transforming space and outplaying strategic layouts. Battleships, submarines, even artillery. All these means were re-evaluated and transformed through the prism of experience driven to despair by defeats. The moment came when it was clear, theories of supremacy of heavy ships, when their steel rings seemed unbreakable, had fallen in a swift and final decline. In post-war analyses, one hears that these traditional ideas were an illusion, that the machinery of massive warship construction, their armor and power, did not guarantee success against modern, adaptive tactics. Analysts were unequivocal. Germany did not lose merely because of tactical mistakes or battlefield misfortunes. Its defeat was the product of systemic constraints, internal and external. Internal, born of narrow strategic thinking, resource scarcity, and technological shortcomings. External, of an inability to oppose the technological superiority of U.S. carrier groups, their organization, and tactical flexibility. That was the key to understanding. Defeat was not only the outcome of weak decisions, but a systemic result pointing to the need to rethink the entire future concept of naval warfare. But the main question around these revelations remains: how could it happen that German naval thought became stuck in old dogmas? How could they fail to notice, fail to grasp, fail to prepare for a new form of war? The maritime form, as Western specialists imagine, already cresting on the horizon. Why did so many leaders, admirals, and strategists fail to adapt their ideas, fail to understand the scale of the changes already underway? These questions keep not only historians in suspense, they embody the fear that even today we may be blind to new,
revolutionary aspects of war,
Компании,
to technologies that will change the rules that military analysts can see. The lessons of the past must be our guide if we are to avoid repeating them. Every new challenge requires a new strategy, new tools, new thinking. And finally, we must ask, what next? Is today's prospect of naval battle merely the development of technologies and armaments, or is it a broader rethinking of strategy, a deep transformation in step with the times? Perhaps the present and the future are not only new ships, drones, hypersonic platforms, but a new philosophy, a readiness to discard obsolete dogmas, and to recognize that victory is won not only by force but by intellect, flexibility, and willingness to change. Time sets its terms.
История американских авианосцев and places first not a heap of war machines, but a strategy capable of responding to the challenges of a new age. That is the chief lesson. The future of naval warfare is not only technological progress, but a re-evaluation of the human being, his ideas and his decisions. For war is, above all, a contest of minds.